Welcome back. Take a slow breath and let the world grow quiet around you. Because from this moment forward, my story begins to shift. The easy days of traveling with aunts, the gentle rhythm of roads and markets, the quiet years of learning and observing, they were coming to an end. A new force was beginning to rise in my life, one that would carry me far beyond the limits of my old world. In this next chapter, you will hear how a single encounter, a single decision, opened the first door to the destiny waiting for me. Are you ready? Then walk with me and let the next part of my story unfold. I did not return to the capital as the woman who had left it. The dust of bacteria had settled into my skin, and no amount of bathing could erase the memory of stone falling, of soldiers shouting my name, of the king's voice declaring it before an entire army. When we approached the gates of the city, the guards stood straighter. Word had already outrun us. Rumors always travel faster than horses, and though many did not yet know the details, they knew the shape of the story. A woman had stood where only commanders dared to stand. A woman had seen through walls. A woman had helped bring down a city that had mocked the empire. Some looked at me with awe, some with suspicion, some with the kind of discomfort that comes from seeing a rule broken, that they had always believed unbreakable. But none looked away. Not now, not anymore. When Ninus entered the capital, he did so as a king triumphant. The gates flung wide, drums thundered, banners unfurled like wings across the sky. I rode behind him, not beside him, not yet, but close enough that whispers coiled through the crowd like smoke. There, that is her, the one from Bactria, the river-born girl. The king's what? Advisor, general, wife-to-be? No, her husband still lives. Then, something else. Something dangerous. Dangerous. A new word for me, or perhaps one I had always carried, without knowing. Aunts. Beside me, rode stiffly. He felt the glances, the speculation, the shifting of worlds that no marriage vow could fully protect us from. I felt it too, but I also felt something else rising inside me, a strange, fierce clarity. I belonged to myself before I belonged to any man, before I belonged to any king, before the world had a name ready for what I was becoming. The city gates swallowed us in sound and color. Incense curled through the air. The walls glowed under the afternoon sun. The pavement trembled with the weight of horses and the echo of thousands of feet. Ninus raised a hand, acknowledging the cheers. His face was carved in triumph. Yet, when his gaze slid toward me, even for a heartbeat, something softened. Not tenderness, recognition, possibility, the kind of look kings reserve for things they intend to claim. Life after a great victory is sometimes more dangerous than life on the field itself. Men return with swollen pride. Courtiers sharpen their tongues. The palace becomes a beast with many eyes, and I, suddenly visible, became something it wanted to inspect. I was invited to gatherings where women dripped gold from wrists and ears, their laughter soft as silk and twice as sharp. They circled me with polite smiles, their curiosity wrapped in honeyed words. So, you were really there? In armor? In the dust? How astonishing. How inappropriate. How bold. I knew their tones well. Admiration, as long as it cost them nothing. Envy wrapped in compliments. Fear hiding in gossip. The men were no better. Some looked at me as though I carried a sword beneath my veil. Some stared openly, trying to decide whether I was a novelty or a threat. Some tried to charm me, foolish, transparent, hoping proximity to me would bring them closer to the king. And the king, Ninus, watched it all. He watched the commanders who spoke of me with clenched teeth, and the ones who praised me too loudly. He watched the palace women who whispered behind jeweled fingers. He watched Honest struggle to hold his composure, as he realized the world was shifting around us all. And he watched me, not like a man studying a woman, but like a strategist studying the horizon before a storm. Days passed, then weeks. The celebration of Bactria's fall dimmed into routine court life. Ons resumed his position among the king's administrators. He was valued, respected, but no longer the most interesting part of our household. I attended councils sometimes, at the king's request, not always, not openly, but enough that a rumor grew like ivy along the walls. She advises him. He listens to her. She sees what others cannot. Some came to respect me. Others came to resent me. But the king did not seem to care whether the palace disliked me. He cared that I was useful. He summoned me more frequently, sometimes for matters of strategy, sometimes to hear disputes, sometimes simply to listen as he thought out loud. I learned then that power has many faces, some loud, some silent. Ninus was not a man of unnecessary words. He wasted none on flattery. He asked direct, sometimes brutal questions. He demanded clarity, and I gave it to him. Sometimes he grew impatient with others and turned sharply toward me. Speak, Semiramis, tell me what they are not saying. And I did. A few courtiers flinched, some glared, others grudgingly nodded. But each time the king listened, my place in that world grew more solid. The danger, of course, was inevitable. Power always breeds competition. Whispers grew louder. Accusations took shape in private corners. She manipulates him. She seeks the throne. She is a witch. She will undo the kingdom. None of it was new. Women who step near the center of power walk into storms older than language. But I was not naive. I chose my battles. I spoke when needed, stayed silent when wisdom demanded it, accepted praise with a bowed head, deflected jealousy with courtesy, and listened, always listened. It was after one such council that Ninus asked me to walk with him to the northern terrace of the palace. The terrace overlooked the city, its rooftops, its winding streets, its temples reaching skyward like hands in prayer. From up there, Babel wrapped around us like a living mosaic. You see this place, Nina said, leaning his hands on the carved stone railing. but you have not yet spoken of it, because you have not asked, I answered. He glanced at me with that half-amused, half-challenging gleam in his eyes. So I ask, what does Semiramis see when she looks at the greatest city of my empire? I stepped closer to the edge. The wind caught a stray lock of my hair. Voices rose faintly from far below. Vendors shouting, children laughing, the clatter of carts on stone. It is magnificent, I said softly. Alive, a beast made of people and stone. Still growing, he nodded once. And imperfect, I added. His eyebrow arched. Imperfect. Yes, I said. Beautiful but incomplete. Strong but restless. The city knows it can be more, and it waits for the one who will make it so. He stared at me then, not in anger, not in surprise, but in something like hunger, not desire, not yet, but the hunger of a king who recognizes a vision that mirrors his own. You speak, he said slowly, as though you were born for these walls. I turned my gaze toward the horizon, where the late sun dipped into streaks of gold. In a way, I said, I think I was. Silence stretched between us, not empty, but charged. Tell me, Nina said at last, his voice a shade lower, if you were given the power to shape this city, what would you build? The question was not innocent. It was not small. It was an invitation and a test and a prophecy woven into one. I took a long breath. I would build, I said, gardens that touch the sky, terraces rising like steps to heaven, where the air is scented with cedars and myrrh, where water runs in channels above the earth, as if defying its own nature. He blinked once, slowly. I would carve canals through the streets. I continued, bringing the river's voice into every corner of the city, so that Babylon breathes water as easily as it breathes air. I moved along the railing, gesturing to the far districts. I would strengthen the walls until no army dares to dream of touching them. Build gates that shine like jewels, azure and gold. Raise palaces that seem to float. Columns carved with beasts that guard the city. I turned back to him, and I would do it not as a decoration, but as a statement that Babylon is not only the seat of a king, but the dream of a civilization. Ninus exhaled, a sound somewhere between awe and calculation. You think like a ruler, he said quietly. I met his gaze. You asked me what I would do, I replied. You did not ask me to think small. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. You are dangerous, he murmured. I know, I said softly. So are you. His eyes darkened, not with desire, but with possibility, and possibility, in the mind of a king, is far more perilous. It was in those days that something shifted between us. Not love, not yet. Love is slow. Love takes root. Love requires time. This was something sharper, quicker, born of mutual recognition. I did not flirt with him. I did not seek his attention. I did not lower my gaze or soften my words. He respected me for that, perhaps even needed it, and he began. slowly, to let me see sides of him. He did not show others his temper, his frustrations with incompetent generals, his unease with priests who twisted omens to favor their own ambitions, his doubts. Yes, even a king has those, and sometimes, late in the evenings, his loneliness. A king's throne is high, but it is surrounded by air too thin for easy breathing. One night, after council drained the life from him, he dismissed everyone but me. He sat heavily, pressing his palms to his brow. They come to me with their problems, he said, but never with solutions. They tell me what cannot be done, never what can. You know why? I said gently. Solutions make a man responsible. Complaints keep him safe. He gave a humorless laugh. Sometimes, he said, I think you see through people too easily. And you? I asked. Do you think I see through you? He met my gaze, and for a brief moment, I saw not a king, but a man worn thin by the weight of ruling. Yes, he said quietly, and that is why I do not send you away. The words were simple, but they were a stone dropped into a deep well. From that night on, something in our connection thickened. The palace felt smaller, the city larger, my name heavier, arms more fragile in my arms. I still loved him, or believed I did, but love was no longer the only force shaping my life. I was standing on the threshold between two worlds, the world of the wife I had been, and the world of the queen I was becoming, and sooner than I could have imagined, fate would push me, not gently, but violently, through that threshold. The signs began subtly. Ninus's health faltered on one hot summer afternoon, just after a council session. He dismissed us all, with a gesture that lacked its usual force. That evening, rumors drifted like smoke through the palace. The king had grown pale. He had collapsed briefly. The physicians were whispering among themselves. When I entered his chamber, he lay on a couch, breathing slightly too fast, his jaw clenched. A brazier burned nearby, with herbs meant to ease the chest. He looked up when he saw me, and something in his eyes was the same look men have when they realize winter has arrived sooner than expected. Do not look at me like that, he said, his voice softer than usual. I am not dead yet. Yet. I repeated sharply, do not speak as if your death is already decided. He waved a hand. Even kings die. Semiramis. Yes, I said, stepping closer, but not today. He studied my face, as though memorizing its lines. You care, he said softly. Of course I care, I answered, though my voice felt caught between two worlds. He closed his eyes for a moment. When I am gone, he murmured, the city will look to someone for strength. My breath froze. I understood instantly what he had not yet dared say. No, I whispered. You have an heir. You have sons. You have generals. None like you. He interrupted. The words struck like a blow. He opened his eyes again. I have built this empire, he said. But you would build something greater. Something that would stand long after the dust of my battles has faded. My heart pounded. Do not speak of succession. I said, "It is not time." He gave me a faint, tragic smile. "You do not get to choose the hour," he said. "Kings do not choose death. Death chooses kings." He reached for my hand. I hesitated. Then I let him take it. His fingers were warm, too warm. "You must promise me," he whispered, "that if the throne becomes yours, if the city becomes yours, you will not shrink from it." I felt the world tilt. "Ninus," I began, but he shook his head, a flash of his old command fire passing through his eyes. "Promise me." I could not lie to him. I could not pretend I had never imagined it. I could not pretend I was not walking, slowly but surely, toward the center of a world that had begun to bend around me. I swallowed, and I spoke the words that sealed a destiny. "I promise." His breath shuddered. "You will be extraordinary," he whispered. He closed his eyes. He did not let go of my hand, and I understood then, with a weight that pressed into my bones, that the line between loyalty and destiny had finally snapped. I would lose him soon, and when I did, I would stand alone on the precipice he had pointed me toward. Queen, not by marriage, not by inheritance, but by necessity, by force, by the shape of everything I had become. That night, as I stood on the balcony outside his chamber, the wind warm against my face, the city glowing under scattered torches, I felt the future gathering like a storm. People below lived their small lives, bargaining, laughing, loving, praying, unaware that their world was shifting, unaware that their queen was already half born. I placed my hands on the stone railing, the same place Ninus had stood with me weeks before, and I whispered to the sleeping city, "I will rebuild you. I will make you beautiful. I will make you eternal. I will make you mine." Far below, the river carried the words away, and in the darkness behind me, Ninus breathed unevenly, as kings do when the end stands close. I did not cry. There would be time for tears later. For now, I stood between two lives, between two worlds, between two futures, the wife of a fading man, the shadow of a rising queen. And in the silence of that night, Babylon waited as if it knew that its greatest age was about to begin. I felt the king dying long before the physicians admitted it. Not because of omens, not because of dreams, not because the priests circled his chambers like anxious vultures, but because the palace itself changed. The palace is a living creature. When a king weakens, its breath becomes thin, its walls tighten, its servants whisper more softly, as though the stones might be listening. That was how I knew. The air grew heavy, the light dimmed, people walked carefully, as if each step might crack the ground beneath us. And Ninus, who had commanded armies without blinking, who had faced rebellion with a steady hand, who had conquered cities and broken empires, now struggled to rise from his couch. It was not sudden. Great men do not fall like towers. They crumble slowly, quietly, a little each day, until one morning the world realizes the shape has changed. The palace physician spoke in half-truths. He must rest. The fever will break, his strength will return. The omens are unclear. The gods may still show mercy. But I saw their eyes. They were preparing to witness a death. Every dynasty has its own way of dying. Ours died in whispers, with incense curling from braziers, with prayers muttered into silk curtains, with courtiers pretending not to count how many breaths their king had left before the power in the room transferred to someone else. That someone else is the reason their gazes kept glancing toward me when they thought I wasn't looking. In those days, I sat beside Nina's bed almost every night. He slept in fits, waking sometimes in confusion, sometimes in pain, sometimes in clarity, so sharp it cut through both of us. One night, his voice barely above a breath, he asked, "Do you ever regret betrayal?" I hesitated. War leaves shadows on the soul. Some stay, some fade. Some choose to return at the worst possible moments. "No," I whispered, "but I regret what it made of us." His fingers twitched, trying to reach mine. I took his hand. "What did it make of us?" he asked. "A king who needed me," I said softly, "and a woman who could no longer pretend she was small." His mouth curved faintly, a ghost of the old Ninus. "You were never small," he murmured. "I only thought you were. You only wanted me to be." I corrected gently. He did not argue. Silence settled, thick, full of truth. Neither of us knew how to hold. His fever worsened. The fire in his body rose, even as the fire in his eyes dimmed. On the 7th night of the worst week, he gripped my wrist with a sudden burst of strength, strong enough to pull me down to his side. "Listen," he rasped. I leaned close. "You must not let them choose for you." "Who?" I whispered. "Everyone." He breathed. "The generals, the priests, the council, even the people. They fear a woman with a mind. They will try to cage you in silk or drown you in honeyed lies." His hand tightened again, burning with fever. "You must take the throne before they decide. You cannot." My breath caught. "Ninus, no," he said, his voice suddenly fierce, the last flare of a dying fire. "You promised." I closed my eyes. His voice, his command, the weight of destiny settling on my shoulders. It felt like standing under a sky turning to stone. "I did," I whispered. "I promised." His grip loosened. "Good." The word drifted away like smoke. Then his hand fell, not softly, not dramatically, just fell, like something that had been holding on too long. A moment later, his breath faded from a steady thread to a broken whisper, to nothing. The king had died, and with him died the last person who had seen me as something more than a threat or a prophecy. There are kinds of grief that do not cry. There are kinds of grief that sit in the lungs like wet clay and refuse to move. I sat with him until dawn. The lamps burned low. The incense turned to ash. The shadows in the room shifted, as if trying to understand the shape of absence. He was gone. The man who had turned his gaze toward me and changed the course of my life. Gone. The man whose mind had matched mine, stride for stride. Gone. the man who had wanted me, not for beauty, not for comfort, but for clarity, gone. I did not weep. I was too full of silence for tears. At sunrise, the priests entered. They froze when they saw me, a woman, alone with a dead king. They looked at each other, and I saw it begin. Fear, calculation, politics, danger. One bowed stiffly. Lady, he said, shaking slightly, you must leave. This chamber must be purified. We must prepare the body. But then he looked more closely at my dry eyes, at my stillness, at the way I stood beside the king's body, as though I was not just mourning him, but guarding him, as though the room still belonged to us. He swallowed hard. Lady, his voice trembled again. Is it true? Did he name? I raised a hand. He stopped speaking, because in that moment, even before the council gathered, even before the generals closed ranks, even before the palace erupted in chaos, they knew. I could see it in their faces. The crown was closer to me than to any of them, and that terrified them, as it should. Word spread like fire over dry reeds. By mid-morning, the palace was a battlefield without weapons. Servants running, advisors arguing, the high priests demanding omens, the generals whispering strategies, the king's adult son pacing like a trapped wolf, courtiers pretending sorrow, while calculating chances. Hans found me in the outer courtyard. The moment he saw my face, his legs almost buckled. You were with him? He whispered. Yes, I said. He hesitated, not out of disrespect, but because he already sensed the truth. Ninus had tied me to the throne. With his last breath, On stepped closer, his voice cracking. What happens to us now? He asked. I touched his cheek, a gesture full of memories. Our small home, our quiet nights, the love that had once been enough when the world was smaller. But now the world was a beast that refused to shrink. I did not know. I whispered, I only know I must walk the path he set before me. He closed his eyes, and if that path leads away from me, he asked, voice breaking. My throat tightened. I hope it does not, I said, but I cannot promise what the throne will demand. He nodded once, a small, painful nod, the nod of a man understanding. He is losing the woman he loves to a destiny he cannot fight. Before noon, I was summoned to the council chamber. The council, a ring of powerful men, thick robed, heavy necklaced, eyes sharp with fear, sat waiting. The king's eldest son, the prince, stood with them, a handsome man, broad-shouldered, fierce, and utterly unprepared for the future. When I entered, the murmur stopped. Silence spread. The prince stepped forward. My father is dead, he said, his voice too loud, too hot. The throne is mine. A few counselors nodded vigorously. Others hesitated. A few glanced toward me, as if checking whether I would break or bow. I did neither. I looked at him steadily. Your father, I said gently, was a great king, but he ruled not only with lineage, but with wisdom. You dare, he began. I dare to speak truth. I cut in, my voice quiet, but sharp as a drawn blade. The room stiffened, the prince's jaw clenched. You are nothing without my father's favor, he hissed. Then it is fortunate, I said softly, that his favor was the last thing he gave. A ripple moved through the council. Shock, fear, certain men turning pale. One of the older counselors cleared his throat. Lady Semiramis, he said cautiously, did the king name a successor? In your presence, I held his gaze, and for a second that stretched like a lifetime, the entire chamber held its breath. I let the silence grow, expand, fill the room like a rising tide. Then I spoke. He said, I began, my voice steady, soft, but unshakable, that Babylon must not be led by those who see only the past. I took a step forward. He said, the city must be led by the one who sees its future. Another step, and he said, I continued, letting my voice fall into the stillness like a stone into deep water, that I must not shrink from it. Gasps, sharp breaths. A few men swore under their breath. The prince's face turned red. You lie, he shouted. He would never choose. He did not choose with words, I said. He chose with trust. I let the weight of Bactria hang in the air, the memory of victory, the memory of the king praising me before thousands. He showed Babylon, I said quietly, whom he trusted with his victories. Silence. Then the oldest priest, the one whose voice carried centuries of ritual, bowed his head. Let the omens decide, he said. The council turned to him, hungry for some authority that would absolve them of responsibility. The priest drew lots, read smoke, checked celestial charts, chanted ancient words. The room waited. I stood still, very still, like a mountain waiting for the wind to remember its place. At last, the priest lifted his head. The signs, he said, favor the lady. Chaos, shouts, arguments, accusations, panic. The prince lunged toward the priest. Guards seized him. He screamed my name like a curse. I did not flinch, because in that instant the world bowed inward, not to my beauty, not to my marriage, not to my softness, but to my inevitability. That evening, as the sun dyed red behind the western gates, the crown of Babylon was placed in my hands. It was heavier than stone, heavier than destiny, heavier than everything I had carried before. I lifted it slowly, my vision blurred, not with tears, but with the sheer weight of what I was about to become. A woman, a foreign-born woman, a foundling, a wife, a soldier, a strategist, and now, by the will of a dying king, the fear of a trembling council, and the undeniable truth of my own assent, a queen. I placed the crown upon my head. The chamber bowed. Some bowed in loyalty, some in terror, some because they had no choice, but they bowed. The crown settled into my hair, warm from the hands that had carried it, cold from the metal that had never been shaped for a woman. And I whispered, only for myself, only for the river that had spared me, only for the destiny that had chased me down. I will build a world the gods will envy. In that moment, I became what none before me had dared be. Semiramis, Queen of Babylon. They called me Queen, but a word spoken once does not settle into the bones. It hangs above you, weightless, treacherous, until you prove you can bear its weight. I learned this the moment I stepped into the throne hall, wearing the crown Ninus had warmed with his last breath. Men bowed, women lowered their eyes. The guards struck their spears against the stone in formal salute. And yet, the air trembled with disbelief. A woman on a throne, a woman seated where kings had sat since the world was young, a woman whose mind had cracked open bacteria, a woman whose name had already begun to cling to legend. Some bowed in loyalty, some bowed in terror, some bowed with hatred blooming behind their ribs, like poison flowers. But they bowed. For nights after my coronation, I did not sleep, not because of fear. Fear was a thing I had already learned how to swallow, but because the city itself kept me awake. Babylon pulsed beneath my window, a vast, restless beast of stone and breath. By day, it roared with markets and crowds. By night, it whispered to me through the dark, build me, shape me, finish what the others only began. I walked the terraces alone. I stood beneath the great walls. I traced my fingers along the stone lines carved by forgotten hands. I watched the river glisten under moonlight, as if it were a silver vein feeding the heart of the empire. And in every corner of Babylon, in every whisper of wind through the date palms, I felt the same truth. The city was magnificent, but incomplete, beautiful, but unfulfilled, ancient, but not eternal. I had inherited a throne, but what I truly desired was a legacy. Not one carved from conquest alone, but from wonder. The palace advisors came to me, one by one, bearing scrolls, warnings, protocols, traditions. Your Majesty, you must proceed with caution. Your Majesty, the priests disapprove of such freedoms. Your Majesty, the generals believe you rely too much on your own counsel. Your Majesty, the treasury cannot endure ambitious projects. Their words fell around me like dust. I listened. I nodded. I allowed them the illusion that their cautions restrained me. But their fears were not mine. I had stood in the breach of a collapsing wall. I had walked through dust and fire to seize a city. I had lost a king and gained a crown on the same breath. What could caution do to me now? I wanted Babylon to rise, and so I spoke the words that caused the palace to freeze. We will build gardens in the sky. Silence, not ordinary silence, a stunned, breathless silence that made even the air seem afraid. An advisor stammered, gardens. In the sky, my queen? Yes, I said. Terraces rising higher than the walls. Stone platforms layered like the steps of a dream. Trees that bloom above the streets. Water flowing where no river has the right to go. Another whispered, horrified, such a feat is impossible. I smiled. So was breaking Bactria. Yet here we stand. Some lowered their eyes. Others stared. One bowed deeply, as though conceding something sacred. If you command it, Majesty, we must obey. But I did not speak from command. I spoke from vision. Babylon will be a wonder, I said softly, a place where travelers cross deserts and mountains simply to stand beneath our terraces and feel the breath of the gods in the shade of our cedars. I saw their fear, their confusion, their awe. It fed me, not with arrogance, but with purpose. If I was to wear the crown of Babylon, I would make Babylon worthy of the crown. The planning began before dawn the next morning. Architects, engineers, artisans, stone cutters, channel makers, gardeners, from the furthest corners of the empire. They filled the palace halls with drawings, models, measurements, arguments. Some told me my plan was madness. A floating mountain built of stone, terraces supported by arches taller than temple towers, irrigation that defied gravity. It cannot be done, they said. I answered with a single question. Then, why does the idea haunt you? And they could not respond, because the truth was this. Human beings are drawn to the impossible, the way moths are drawn to flame. Impossible things promise immortality. I chose the site with my own hands, a rise of land on the northern side of the palace, overlooking the river and the walls beyond, the place where the sun first kissed the city each morning. I climbed the rise alone one morning, the grass cool beneath my sandals, the wind carrying the scent of cedar and clay. I stood at the highest point and closed my eyes, and there, in the hush of dawn, with Babylon sprawled like a living tapestry beneath me, I saw it, the gardens, rising tier upon tier like a staircase to the heavens, palm trees throwing shadows on sunlit stone, cypress, olive, pomegranate, blossoms spilling like waterfalls, birds wheeling above terraces, overflowing with life, pools shimmering with sky-reflected light, water murmuring along hidden channels, shade dancing across mosaic floors, a floating paradise, a dream sculpted into reality, a testament to what a woman, unshackled and unafraid, could carve into the bones of the world. I opened my eyes. This is where we begin, I whispered, and the earth seemed to breathe in response. The work consumed the city. Stone was quarried from the far cliffs. Timbers were hauled on carts, dragged by oxen so large their breath came in clouds. Engineers calculated and recalculated volumes of water, weights of stone, angles of arches. Every day I walked among the workers, not behind veils, not from distant balconies, but among them, hands calloused, feet dusty, heart steady. They stared in shock at first. A queen walking the scaffolds, a queen asking questions about mortar, a queen touching unfinished stone to feel its temperature beneath the sun. But soon they're all softened into something warmer. Respect, responsibility, pride. A craftsman works differently when he feels he is building a dream rather than a structure. Some evenings, when the work slowed, I stood with the overseers and reviewed the plans, arches rising like ribs of a giant beast, columns carved with lions and bulls, channels engineered to lift river water higher than any natural spring. The city around us buzzed with whispers. The queen is building mountains. The queen is conquering the sky. The queen is touching the realm of gods. I let them whisper. Dreams begin in whispers, but not everyone dreamed. Resistance came quietly at first. The priests muttered about pride. The generals muttered about resources. The Prince Nina's bitter son muttered about a woman grasping too much power. One night, during a heated council meeting, the prince struck the table with his fist. "You overreach," he shouted. "You squander the treasury. You weaken the army. You play goddess while the people hunger." His voice shook with humiliation and desperation. The advisors held their breath. I rose slowly. "The people do not hunger," I said. "There is grain enough for 3 years. You know this." He spat. "You deceive them with monuments." "No," I replied softly. "I inspire them with wonders." He pointed at me, trembling. "You build gardens. Gardens, while your throne is hardly warm." The room froze. This was not anger. It was challenge. All eyes shifted to me. I stepped forward until I stood only a breath away from him. "The throne is warm," I said, "because I sit on it, not because a man approves." "Huh," he blanched. Before he could reply, I leaned slightly closer and spoke the truth that broke him. "Your father trusted my mind. He trusted my courage. And the people now trust my vision. If you cannot bear that, stand aside." Silence, the kind that tastes of iron and destiny. He backed away, not because he accepted defeat, but because he recognized something he could not yet fight. I was no longer a queen in name only. I was becoming what Babylon needed, a force. Years passed. The terraces rose, stone by stone, arch by arch, tree by tree, a staircase of life climbing into the sky. The sound of chisels became music. The scent of fresh timber became incense. The sweat of thousands became a river, feeding a dream. Workers came from across the empire, just to say they had touched the stones of the queen's impossible garden. And I grew with it. My shoulders strengthened, my voice deepened, my fear receded, my resolve sharpened. I was no longer the shepherd's daughter, the river child, the foundling, the advisor, the strategist. I was Semiramis, queen of Babylon, builder of wonder, shaper of stone and destiny. And when at last the terraces touched the sunlight, at a height the gods themselves might envy, the people gathered below. As water was released into the channels, the river rose, climbed, sung through the pipes, splashed into elevated pools, cascaded over stone edges, fell in curtains of silver. The crowd gasped. The gardens bloomed around me, a world suspended above the earth. Birdsong, water music, leaf shadows dancing across mosaic floors. A city in the sky, my city, my creation, my crown of stone and water. That night, as torches flickered along the terraces and the scent of jasmine drifted through the warm air, I stood on the highest platform and looked out over Babylon. The walls glowed gold, the gates shimmered blue, the river flowed like a band of moonlight. Babylon had risen, and so had I. A voice behind me whispered, "They will remember this forever." I turned. One of my architects, old, exhausted, awestruck, bowed his head. They will say, "The gods build this with their own hands." I smiled. "No," I said softly, the wind lifting my hair, the stars reflected in the pools below. "They will say a woman did, but glory casts shadows." And even as Babylon blossomed, even as the world praised my vision, even as stories of the hanging gardens traveled across deserts and seas, trouble grew at the edges of the empire, a distant kingdom, rich in jewels, strong in armies, famous for elephants and warriors and kings who bent to no one. India. Their ambassadors arrived with cold beauty in their eyes. Their messages were sharp, their tone edged with challenge. Their king refused tribute, refused alliance, refused respect. He believed Babylon had grown soft under a woman's hand. He believed I would not march beyond my walls. He believed wrong, but that belongs to the next chapter, because gardens are built in peace, but empires are tested in war, and so begins the next turn of my destiny. I had built gardens that touched the sky, terraces climbing like the steps of a forgotten god, water running upward as if gravity itself bowed to my will. The world spoke my name with awe. Babylon shone brighter than any kingdom of its age, and yet no garden, however high, can silence the distant thunder of rivalry from beyond the mountains, from the jungles where monsoon rains fall like curtains, from lands where the air glows with unfamiliar spices and heat. A message arrived, not written in humility, not wrapped in courtesy, but sharp as a spear, a refusal. The king of India, lord of warriors, elephants, jewel-flecked crowns, a ruler whose armies moved like monsoon storms, sent word. He did not recognize my right to rule. He did not acknowledge my sovereignty. He did not fear Babylon. He did not fear me. It was as if the world itself whispered in my ear, "Rise higher, or be forgotten." The messenger from India knelt at the bottom of the Hall of Lions, though not deeply enough for my liking. He was tall, with skin like polished bronze, and a gaze too steady for a man speaking to a queen. He laid a gilded tablet before me, decorated not with reverence, but with arrogance. I broke the seal. The message inside was short. Babylon is a distant land, ruled by a woman who mistakes gardens for power. I felt the hall tighten, advisors inhaling sharply, guards shifting their stance, embers of outrage sparking across the room. The messenger lifted his chin and added, as if to carve the insult deeper, "My king says he will bow to no woman, and certainly not to one who sends flowers instead of armies." The palace did not breathe. I rose slowly, deliberately, so that even the lions carved on the pillars seemed to watch me. "Tell your king," I said, my voice soft enough to make the silence tremble, "that Babylon rises higher than mountains, and even from here I look down upon his pride." The messenger swallowed. "Good. Tell him," I continued, "that I have seen kingdoms fall for less than his insolence." I stepped closer. "Tell him I have broken cities far older and stronger than his, and I did it with dust still in my hair and blood still cooling on my fingers. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to argue. I did not allow either. And tell him, I whispered, that if he wishes to test whether a woman can conquer a king, I will march to his door and show him. Yeah. The messenger bowed then, deeply, properly. At last, he understood. He had come to plant insult. He left carrying the seed of war. For weeks afterward, Babylon buzzed like a hive, kicked open by a reckless hand. The generals argued, India is too far. India is too strong. India welcomes death as a guest in battle. Your Majesty, this is a fool's dream. The priests muttered omens, shuffling bones and smoke, claiming to sense unrest among the gods. The advisors fretted over supply lines, money, distance, terrain. Even the people who adored me for the gardens I had raised and the peace I had held whispered in the markets. Why provoke a distant giant? Why stir the sleeping dragon? Why risk Babylon's golden age? Why? Because kings do not test queens unless they seek to be answered. Because I had risen so swiftly that the world still pressed its fingers against my edges, trying to find a weakness. Because the name Semiramis had grown too bright, and bright things attract challengers. But above all, because part of me, the part that had once walked barefoot through dust, dreaming of distant cities, felt the old pull again, the pull of destiny, the pull of danger, the pull of a horizon that dared me to cross it. I was not made for stillness. I was not shaped for quiet rain. The river that had spared me as a child had carried me into storms for a reason. And India, wild, distant, resplendent India, was the next storm. Still, I did not rush. A queen who charges blindly into war is not a queen. She is a child playing with fire. Instead, I summoned my council not to seek permission, to announce intention. They gathered in the chamber of stars, beneath a dome, painted with constellations so old. Even the priests no longer remembered their names. Generals, priests, advisors, nobles, envoys, the full weight of Babylon's governance arrayed before me. I stepped into the center of the chamber. No jewels, no crown, no veil, just armor, simple, light, shaped to my form, so they would remember exactly who had taken Bactria. A murmur rippled through them. Fear, respect, anticipation. Good. I stood with my hands at my sides, and my gaze fixed on the horizon, carved into the far wall. India challenges Babylon, I said. India insults Babylon. I lifted my chin, and therefore India will know Babylon. Silence, absolute, complete. One of the generals, bolder than most, stepped forward. My queen, it is a long march across deserts, mountains, jungles. We do not know the terrain. Their elephants are unstoppable. Their warriors are fierce. The distance alone could kill more men than battle. I nodded. All true. A priest spoke, voice shaking. And what do you seek there, Majesty? tribute, fame, submission. I met his eyes. I seek truth, I said, about who I am, about what Babylon can be, about what the world will remember. Gasps, whispers, unease. They understood. This was not merely a campaign. This was legacy. The prince, bitter, simmering, narrowly watched, stepped forward with a sneer. You want to conquer India, to prove a point, to prove you are mighty, to prove you are more than a commander's clever wife. The room inhaled sharply. I walked toward him, slowly, softly, like a shadow given shape. When I was close enough to see the fear behind his hatred, I whispered, I do not march to prove I am mighty. I march because I am mighty. He flinched. I stepped past him as though he were merely an obstacle in a hallway. Then I turned to the full council. Prepare the armies, I said. Prepare the engineers. Prepare the supply trains, the scouts, the scribes, the strategists. My voice did not rise, but the quiet carried deeper than any shout. We march east. A dozen voices erupted at once. Protests, warnings, fears, strategies, doubts. I lifted a hand. The chamber fell silent instantly. You fear we cannot reach India, I said. You fear the distance. You fear the jungles. You fear the elephants. You fear the unknown. I looked around the room, one by one, until each man felt seen. You should fear something else more. A beat, me, unchallenged, unmoving, caged in peace until I rot. The silence that followed was reverent, almost holy. I continued, Babylon has built wonders, but wonders grow still if there is no wind to test their strength. I placed a hand lightly on my chest. I have built gardens. Now I will build legacy. I stepped back. My decision is made. And that was the end of it. A queen does not ask. A queen does not beg. A queen does not explain. A queen simply decides what the world will become. And the world moves. Preparations began that night. Messengers rode out in every direction. North, south, east, west, summoning troops, ordering provisions, calling in deaths, gathering engineers and siege masters, and hunters familiar with strange beasts. Elephant scholars from distant lands were brought to the palace to explain how those creatures moved, how they charged, how they feared fire, how their armor glinted in battle. Mapmakers worked furiously, inking guesses more than knowledge about lands no Assyrian army had ever crossed. The city, which had settled into the peace of gardens and festivals, woke once more to the heartbeat of war. Drums returned to the barracks. Forges blazed hotter. Men sharpened blades. Horses grew restless. Traders swarmed the markets, smelling profit in every looming conflict. And amid all the noise, all the fear, all the feverish anticipation, word spread far beyond Babylon. Semiramis is marching to India, a woman across continents, at the head of an empire. It sounded like myth even before it began. Hannes watched it all quietly. He followed me through the corridors one evening, and I believed myself alone. My queen, he said softly, I stopped. He had never called me that. In private, not once. I turned to him. His eyes were tired, more tired than when we were simply husband and wife in our little mud brick home near the river. Must you go? He asked. Must you chase every horizon until none remain? His voice broke slightly. You have built enough. You have proven enough. Why must you seek more? I stepped toward him because Babylon deserves more, I said, and because I am not the woman who once lay in your arms, dreaming small dreams. He nodded slowly, painfully. I know, he whispered. I see that. He looked away. What I do not know, he continued, is whether I belong beside the woman you are becoming. Huh? The words stabbed deeper than any spear ever had. I do not wish to lose you, I said quietly. He smiled a sad, small smile. You are already lost to the world, Semiramis, he whispered, and the world does not share. There was no jealousy in his voice, no anger, only truth. We stayed like that for a long moment. Two people who once walked the same path, realizing they were no longer moving in the same direction. Then he bowed, not as a husband, as a subject, and the break between us was sealed. The night before our departure, I stood on the highest terrace of the hanging gardens. The moon shone upon the pools. Leaves whispered in the wind. Water trickled softly through hidden channels. My city breathed around me, alive, eternal, ready to test me. I placed my hands on the stone balustrade and whispered to Babylon, when I return, I will return with the world at my feet. And if I do not return, let these gardens be my monument. Below me, the city glowed like a field of embers. Above me, the stars seemed to lean in closer. And deep in my marrow, I felt it. India would be more than a campaign, more than a conquest, more than a war. It would be the test that decided whether Semiramis would be merely a queen or a legend. In the morning, as dawn bled gold across the sky, the army assembled, tens of thousands, spears like forests, shields catching sunlight, horses stamping the earth, banners rippling like wings. The drums thundered, the gates opened, and I, in armor, shimmering like river light, crown bound beneath a soldier's helm, mounted my horse. The people screamed my name, chanted it, carried it on their breath. Semiramis, 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 a queen leading an army into the unknown, a woman turning geography into challenge, a river child claiming the world. We rode east toward deserts, toward mountains, toward jungles, toward elephants, toward kings who believed themselves untouchable, toward the edge of the world, where destiny waited, and where my story would grow darker, deeper, and far more dangerous. And so, by the end of that chapter, the world I thought I understood had already begun to shift beneath my feet. The quiet life beside Ons, the steady rhythm of duty and travel, the simple certainty of those early years, all of it was changing. New doors were opening, new eyes were turning toward me, and the path I had walked so faithfully was slowly leading me toward a destiny far greater than anything I had imagined. But destiny never announces itself loudly. Not at first. It whispers, it circles, it waits before the next chapter begins. Tell me, if your life began to change in small, invisible ways, would you follow the signs or cling to what you already know? Rest now. Let your thoughts drift softly. And when you return for the next episode, I will show you how the first true turning of my fate finally began. Sleep well until we meet again.